Hi everyone, my name is Favour Olushola, and today I'll be discussing a paper about mesenchymal stem cells promoting metastasis via the activation of an ABL MMP9 signaling axis in lung cancer cells. So, we're first going to look at the overall research question, which is um, do mesenchymal stem cells cause metastasis of lung cancer? So through this presentation, we're going to be able to answer this question and determine um, the effects of mesenchymal stem cells on metastasis of lung cancer. So some background information. First of all, mesenchymal stem cells are basically cells that can specialize into various functions. So this just means that later on these cells are able to kind of differentiate and become blood cells, for instance, or muscle cells. So they can basically take on and specialize into very specific functions, um, wherein they're able to be found in specific organs or tissues. So they're basically going to be blood cells or muscle cells or any other type of specific functional cells. We also have lung cancer, which is the abnormal cell growth in the lungs. And the type of lung cancer we are going to be looking at in this paper is known as adenocarcinoma, and it is found in cells that can make and release fluids such as mucus in the lungs. So we have metastasis, and that basically just means spreading of cancer. So when we are having much more cancer encroaching into different areas in the body, that's metastasis. So once the cancer moves from where it originally began to a different area, we basically have metastasis. Then we have matrix metalloproteinase 9, MMP9, and this is a type of protein found in lung cancer cells. We also have abelsin ABL kinase, and this is also another type of protein that is known to promote metastasis and also regulate cancer pathways. So usually when there's cancer in the body, you can typically find the ABL kinase. So we're looking at the first experimental question, and that is, does MMP9 concentration affect cancer progression and survival rate? So we're looking at two data figures here, which are graphs, and one we have this first one looks at first of all we have varying degrees of MMP9. We also have that here as well, and we're basically looking at the effects of MMP9, of the varying degrees of MMP9 concentrations on patient survival rates over time. So with lung cancer patients, we want to see, okay, when the mesenchymal concentration is low, when it's medium, when it's high, what is its effect on the overall survival rates of that patient over time. So OS stands for overall survival rates. And then over here, we're basically looking at progression-free survival rates. So here we're just looking at overall survival rates in general. We're not looking at whether or not there is cancer progression or there is no cancer progression. But here specifically, we're looking at cancer progression-free survival rates. So we want to see the effects of varying concentrations of MMP9 on the cancer progression free survival rates of patients with lung cancer over time. So the second experimental question is, do mesenchymal stem cells affect MMP9 concentration in lung cancer cells? And here we have this data figure, and in this first bar you're looking at MSC. So MSC is mesenchymal stem cells, and we're looking at solely the mesenchymal stem cells and whether or not these cells see um like the degree to which we see MMPN concentration. So does it have high or low MMPN concentration? The second graph is PC9, which is human lung cancer cells, and we're also looking at the MMP9 concentration in the cells. Then the last bar graph looks at a combination of the two, mesenchymal stem cells with human lung cancer cells, and basically what is the concentration of MMP9 in the cells. So the third experimental question talks about the whether or not ABO kinase affect MMP9 concentration. And here we're looking at two groups of PC9 cells. So remember, PC9 is human lung cancer cells. And here we have SCR, which basically is just talking about PC9 cells where ABO kinase is present. Here we're looking at AA cells, group of cells, which are basically just PC9 cells where ABO kinase is absent. And then within these two groups of PC9 cells, we have some cells where MSC is absent and some cells where MSC is present. We also have that here MSC is absent, here MSC is present. And then we're looking at basically what the presence and absence of ABO kinase, what effect that has on the concentrations of MMP9 within those cells. So here we're looking at the fourth experimental question, which says, does ABO kinase affect metastasis of lung cancer? So we're looking at PC9 cells where two groups of PC9 cells again. So these are human lung cancer cells, and we're looking at one group where there's MSC present and ABO kinase present. Then we're looking at another group where there is MSC present but no ABL kinase. And in particular, we're trying to determine what is the effect of ABO kinase on metastasis of lung cancer. So does it spread or does it not spread, depending on the presence or absence of ABO kinase? So our last experimental question is, does MSC induced pathway increase metastasis of adenocarcinoma? Adenocarcinoma is the type of lung cancer being looked at within this paper. So we have a data figure here, and we're looking at two groups of cells. We're looking at human lung cancer cells without the mesenchymal stem cells and human lung cancer cells with mesenchymal stem cells, and we're trying to determine whether there has been an increase in metastasis or a decrease in metastasis, or basically no metastasis. Sorry, I should put. So whether there is metastasis or no metastasis. So this is just a chart of the results and the conclusions in relation to our overall research question of the effect of mesenchymal stem cells on metastasis in lung cancer. So from our first experimental question, the data figure from that question, we can basically infer that MMP9 does affect cancer progression and survival rates, because with higher MMPN concentrations, we're seeing more cancer progression and lower survival rates. From the second data figure, which is from our second experimental question, we can see that MSC does affect MMP9 concentration in the lung cancer cells. So in the third experimental question, and this data figure of the third experimental question, we can see that yes, ABO kinase does affect MMP9 concentration. It increases MMP9 concentration. From the fourth one, we can see that ABO kinase does increase metastasis of the lung cancer. That is our fourth conclusion. From the fifth data figure and experimental question, we can basically infer that MSC induced pathway will increase metastasis of lung cancer. Okay, so as I mentioned before, the from our first experimental question and data figures, we can see that higher concentrations of MMP9 will increase cancer progression and reduce survival rates of lung cancer patients. Our second conclusion is that mesenchymal stem cells will increase MMP9 concentration in lung cancer cells, as you can see depicted by this image. We have mesenchymal stem cells, and we have our lung with cancers, tumors within the lung, and within those cancers we can see higher concentrations of MMP9. So our third conclusion, ABO kinase will increase MMP9 concentrations, again as depicted by this image. Then the fourth conclusion, ABO kinase will promote metastasis of lung cancer. And the fifth conclusion, the MSC-induced pathway, and this is basically the mesenchymal stem cell-induced ABL kinase MMP9 signaling pathway, will increase metastasis of adenocarcinoma. This is the type of lung cancer that we're looking at for this presentation. So our first discussion, basically, so now we're going to start answering the overall research question by kind of going a bit more into the experimental questions. So we basically are able to deduce here that MMP9 plays a very significant role in cancer metastasis. So we know this because when we looked at both data models of the overall survival and progression-free survival, we could see that higher concentrations of MMP9 in the lung cancer patients caused a decrease in patient survival over time, as it led to more cancer progression. So because higher concentrations of MMP9 increased cancer progression because it caused cancer metastasis, it ultimately led to lower patient survival rates. So even in the overall survival, and looking at particularly with cancer progression-free survival rates, we saw that there was a decline in both the survival rates when there was high concentrations of MMP9, and this lets us know that MMP9 is a catalyst for cancer to spread and actually worsen. So the second discussion states that mesenchymal stem cells promote high MMP9 concentrations, and this is basically indicated by the second data figure, and it lets us know that when mesenchymal stem cells are present, they do enhance and enable higher concentrations of MMP9 in lung cancer cells. So we know this because in the second data figure, when there was only mesenchymal stem cells, we had low concentrations of MMP9. When there was only PC9 to human lung cancer cells, we had low MMP9 concentrations. But when we had a combination of MSC and PC9, we saw higher concentrations of MMP9. So this tells us that, again, we're starting to answer the overall research question about the role of MSC. How can it affect, can it cause metastasis in lung cancer? We're starting to answer that question because here we can see that MSC will cause cancer metastasis because it's increasing the concentrations of MMP9, and as we addressed before, MMP9 causes cancer metastasis. So our third discussion states that ABO kinase is another factor that increases MMP9 concentrations. So we know this because of the third data figure in relation to our third experimental question, and we saw two groups of PC9 cells. So one group had ABO kinase present and the other lacked ABO kinase. Now, in each of those groups, we had some of the PC9 cells with having MSC and some lacking MSC. So we saw that in the PC9 cells with ABO kinase and MSC, they were extremely high concentrations of MMP9. But the ones without ABO kinase had low concentrations of MMP9, and even in the PC9 cells that had MSC, when they didn't have the ABO kinase, they also had low constitutions. In addition to the PC9 cells that had no ABO kinase and no MSC, those ones also too had low concentrations of MMP9. So the conclusion and what can be inferred from this is that you need to have both ABO kinase and MSC to have very high concentrations of MMP9. And as we had just before, MMP9 does cause metastasis. So the third discussion states that ABO kinase is vital to cancer metastasis, and this just reinforces kind of what we deduced from the last discussion. So we saw in the data figure 4 that the PC9 cells with MSC and ABO kinase showed an increase in the number of cancer cells, which lets us know that there was metastasis. So we kind of saw a spreading out of the data points with PC9 cells that had both MSC and ABO kinase. Whilst the ones that had MSC but lacked ABO kinase showed an absence of this metastasis. So this lets us know that MSC alone isn't crucial for metastasis. For metastasis to happen, we need both the MSC and we need ABO kinase, because the ABO kinase is what is going to ensure that those PC9 cells with MSC see an increase in concentration of MMP9, which will cause cancer metastasis. So the last discussion states that the mesenchymal stem cell induced signaling pathway leads to metastasis. So this basically just answers the entire research question. So do mesenchymal stem cells cause metastasis in lung cancer? Yes, they do. How do they do that? Now they do that through the mesenchymal stem cell induced ABO kinase MMP9 signaling pathway. So mesenchymal stem cells are basically that really crucial factor that helps to activate this pathway of ABO kinase and MMP9, and this signaling pathway is what ultimately leads to metastasis of lung cancer. So we see that MSC will increase concentrations of MMP9, and so does the ABO kinase. And this MSC is able to activate the signaling pathway for ABO kinase and MMP9 to work together and then cause metastasis of lung cancer. So that is basically the end of this presentation. Thank you. These are just the references. Thank you.